In the last lecture, we built the kind of the basics of a calculator. We had buttons that did things like print out the answer, add and subtract. Um, However, our calculator has a severe limitation. It only worked on 15 and 3, so we're probably not ready to start bragging about our calculator just yet. So what I'm going to do in this lecture is I'm going to show you how to add an input field to your frame that allows you to enter numbers that can be used inside your calculator. And when we're done, we'll have something that, even though it's still kind of old school, is starting to have the bare bones basics of the way a modern calculator works. Well, let's go to it. So here we have a kind of a halfway completed version of our calculator. I've gone through and added a couple of extra buttons so we don't have to work on the buttons anymore. You can see here we have our glorious store of 12 and operand of 3. As long as your numbers are 12 and 3, our calculator is going to be great. So you can see I've implemented multiplication and division, and let's just run it real quick. So a few more buttons. We could print out the contents, we could add them, we could multiply them, divide them. Well, it's starting to come along. But we need to figure out how to actually enter numbers now, so we're not always working on 12 and 3. So let's go look in the docs and see what Simple GUI provides for entering information. So we go over in the docs and we see we have some control objects again. So the thing we're going to enter actually is a control object. And let's say we have buttons, key presses, mouse clicks, but of course, here's something text input. Now this is not exactly what we want because we want to input a number, but it looks like we don't have a number input function. So let's just see what we can do with text input. So simple enough, it says add input. We give it a string that describes it, a handler, and we give it a width. That's nice. But there's something fundamentally different between a handler for a button and a handler for an input field. In a button, we just clicked it and it did some action. Here, we have an input field. We have a number that the users typed in, and then they maybe hit enter. And when they hit enter, the input field handler gets called. And we need to have that handler have access to whatever the user entered. So the way this is handled is that the input field handler is called with a single parameter. That parameter is whatever the user entered. So when you implement the handler, you're going to need to go through and take this input parameter and do something with it to react to whatever action the user intended when they entered that number. So with that kind of starting point, let's go through now and see if we can piece together how our handler for our input field should work. So let's add an input field to our calculator code. So really it's fairly simple. All we're going to do is we need to go through and define a handler for our input field. So let's say define enter. Remember, the handler is going to have one parameter, and that's going to be the input. We'll call it INP. And what does it need to do? It needs to go through and take that input and assign it to the operand. If we want to put it in the store, that's why we had swap. So we have to be careful. There's a couple of things that could go wrong here. Let's see, we want to take input, we want to assign it in the operand. So I could say something like operand is equal to input. And I guess I could say output at this point. But I've made two errors here. The first thing is, remember, if I want to modify either the operand or the store, those are global variables. So I need to go through and say global operand. I'm going to leave the other error uncorrected. We'll just see what happens when I try to do it. Let's go through and actually kill off 12 and 3. Let's initialize them to the more rational values of 0. And let's go down and enter, say f dot add input. Say enter, what the heck, enter operand. Let's see if we can squeeze it in there. We'll say enter. We'll give it a width of 100. And so we created our event handler. We registered it. We reinitialized the globals. Let's try running it and see what happens here. I think it's going to be interesting. Okay, good. So we have enter operand. That's nice. It tells us what we need to enter. And well, we can print over here. Things are looking good. Not anything with 0 and 0. So let's enter an operand here. So I'm going to enter 12, my favorite number. And to actually make the event handler trigger, I have to hit enter. And what do we see? The operand is 12. Interesting. Okay, didn't expect that. Let's swap that in. And let's enter 3. And hit enter. Boy, it's working great. We got 12 and 3. But I think something's amiss here. Let's do the following. Let's try to add those two. Ooh, we get 123. This is really getting good. I'm going to try something more daring. I'm going to multiply them. Oh, I just blew up. So what happened in there? Well, I didn't anticipate things going quite this crazy, but I think it's actually, you'll see kind of what went on. I said operand is equal to input. Now, what did I tell you input was? This was a text input. This wasn't a number input. So input was a string. So whenever I said operand is equal to input, it actually set the operand to be the string 1, 2. Then I swapped it. It made the store the string 1, 2. Then I entered 3. So it said operand equal to 3. Now at that point I was expecting it to blow up. I was thinking, oh, okay, you know, we do a string 12 plus a string 3. What could happen? Well, it concatenated. It made the string 1, 2, 3. Ah, okay. Everything was going merrily, and then I said, let's multiply. So I said the string 1, 2, 3 times the string 3. At that point, things blew up. Didn't know what to do with multiplication. So this is a moral of a story why you should actually do a fair bit of debugging. That was unplanned, by the way. I knew it was we didn't have the right type for the input, but I didn't realize it was going to go so far. But I think we can actually learn a moral of the story from this, which is we wanted a number here. We wanted operand to be a number. This is a string. So we can fix this very easily. All we need to do is coerce this string into being a number. So we have some functions we knew how to do that with. The function int converts it to an integer. So let's say int of input. And we'll run it again. So let's try our favorite example again. Let's type in 12. Hit enter. Operand is 12. Great. Let's swap it. Let's enter 3. Looking good. Let's add them. Well, we got 15. That was better. We didn't get 123. And then let's see. Let's multiply them. Ah, so now it's actually working the way we want. Well, kind of. There's still one more thing. You know, so we're only working on integers here. Let's see if we can make this work maybe with decimal numbers, because we'd really like to use decimal numbers in our calculator. So if I said 3.14159 and I said enter, it threw an error here. It didn't want to take 3.14159 as a string and convert it directly into a floating point number. So we have an easy thing. Let's just make this a float. We can convert a string into a float. So I'll say float. And let's run it one more time. We come back. Let's see, we can enter 12. Enter. And we could swap it. And now let's enter, say, 3.14159. Enter that. And notice now it's fine. In fact, let's go through and just do multiplication. So sure enough, now actually our calculator is working with floating point numbers, so we're really doing decimals. So we've got the basics of a calculator here. You know, we could kind of make it a little bit nicer. Next week we go through and actually print out the store and the operand here on the screen, make it look like the display of a regular calculator. But I think you can kind of see the basics of how this works. And so this is a nice demonstration of how buttons and input fields work. Okay, I'll see you back in a second for guess the number.